East Report with James Dorsey on Sabahul Muslim.
Well, that's right. Early morning right here on Sabah al-Muslim here in South Africa. Durban this time, the seat of the program, maybe for a couple more days next week as well, inshallah. Well, up next, the Middle East report, and we are joined by, of course, James Dorsey, award-winning scholar and journalist with a different perspective on the Middle East, senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School, International Studies at Singapore, in Singapore, joining us live from Singapore. Of course, you can follow James on his blog spot, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Good day to you, James Dorsey.
Good morning, Sabah al-Nur. Pleasure to be with you.
And thank you for joining us. James, off our discussion immediately. Kurds fear that Sweden is hanging them out to dry to ensure Turkish ratification of Swedish membership in NATO. Now, Sweden for an ever so long time has been a supporter of the Turkish cause. Not only Turkey, but the Kurds, but even back in the day, when you had the Tamil Tigers and various other rebel movements, it seems that the Scandinavian countries, even especially Sweden, had been at the forefront of supporting them. In this case, and as per our discussion, the Kurds, feeling that Sweden is abandoning them because they are keen on joining NATO, and you need, some sort of Turkish approval to get there.
Indeed. So Sweden has always been a place of asylum for the Kurds. I'm not sure how far I would go in saying that they were supporting the Kurds, but they certainly were a safe haven. Sweden, as a result of the Ukraine war, has surrendered its neutrality, if you wish, and applied for NATO membership. It's been approved by NATO. The obstacle was Turkey, which was trying to impose its views on the Kurds, particularly with regard to the fact that they see the Kurds as terrorists. The Kurdish Workers' Party, which has been waging a more than 40-year-long low-level intensity guerrilla war in southeastern Turkey. The Swedes have tried to balance what is legal in Sweden with the Turkish demands, and what you saw last week was that a Kurd was sentenced to jail for drug smuggling and may be sent back to Turkey to serve his sentence. This raises all kinds of questions because this Kurd obviously violated the law, but he's also an asylum seeker. And so the questions of his safety and security, even if he's returned as a prisoner, are fairly substantial. And that's sent shockwaves through the Kurdish community, both in Turkey, northern Iraq, but also in Sweden itself.
James, moving our attention to Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia discovering that restoring diplomatic relations with Iran doesn't solve all problems or many problems, as maybe it's possible that neither country is getting what it hoped for now. On the back of that Chinese brokered peace deal, or should I say restoration of diplomatic relations, which happened a few months ago. Many were optimistic that this would ease tensions. Probably in many ways it has eased tensions, but so many problems remain unresolved. What's your take on the Saudi-Iranian relations as of late?
Indeed, it has reduced tensions. However, and there are many things that the Saudis, as well as the Iranians, wanted to get out of the restoration of diplomatic relations. However, topping the Saudi agenda was Iranian assistance in getting out of the disastrous Yemen war. And topping the Iranian agenda was economic cooperation. And the problem is that neither of those are getting satisfied in ways that either the Saudis or the Iranians would have wanted. The Saudis are discovering that Iranian support for the Houthi rebels in Yemen does not mean Iranian control, and that therefore there are limits to the assistance that the Iranians can provide. And the Iranians are discovering that you can have diplomatic relations, and they should have realized this in advance. You can have diplomatic relations, but that does not change or alter the risk of violating U.S. sanctions against Iran. With other words, the possibilities for economic cooperation are severely limited by the U.S. sanctions, and the Saudis not wanting to break those sanctions and put themselves in the firing line. So as a result, this agreement, while indeed reducing tensions, is not producing what Saudis and Iranians had initially hoped.
Keeping the discussion with Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia has attempted to assert itself on the international stage of late in the last few years, gaining, quite a few accolades to that in the last, I would say, days with their admission into the BRICS Union. And that announcement, of course, coming here in South Africa as of yesterday with the BRICS Summit. Saudi Arabia is going to be one of the new members admitted, and that will be starting next year. But at the same time, reports coming in that would obviously deal a significant reputational blow to the government of Saudi Arabia, where it is alleged that Saudi soldiers mowed down hundreds of Ethiopian migrants on the kingdom's border with Yemen. Now, granted, that obviously is a war zone in many regards, but still, migrants have been, and whatever is the intent of those migrants, economic, refugee status, whatever it may be, they are afforded under international law protection. You cannot open arms or fire on unarmed civilians, men and women and children. And there's these reports, Saudis, of course, denying them. But as far back as 2014, these abuses have been, alleged against the Saudi border guards. What's going to be the reputational situation, or the impact on Saudi Arabia coming out of that?
I think the important thing just to keep in mind is these were migrants returning to Yemen. They were not migrants trying to enter Saudi Arabia. And indeed, the Saudi track record with regard to the treatment of migrant workers, particularly from the Horn of Africa, but not exclusively, is a very checkered track record. But killing hundreds of migrants is extraordinary. And essentially, what I think this damages Saudi Arabia's reputation without question. To what degree it will damage the reputation is going to be to what degree people follow up, governments follow up on this, or whether or not they take the Saudi denial of the incident at face value and do not push for an international investigation. Fact of the matter is that the evidence that Human Rights Watch put forward in terms of documenting what allegedly happened on the Saudi-Iranian border, that evidence is quite convincing. And the proper thing to do would be an independent international investigation. That's clearly something the Saudis are not going to allow.
Finally, focusing on the Arab world's most populous country, that's Egypt, supply of all forms of labor and work to the region, as well as a major player, a major military and social player in that part of the world. Egypt is proving too big to fail as far as Gulf states are concerned. Now, this is months after the UAE and Saudi Arabia linked aid to economic reforms. The Emirates has signed a deal to fund Egyptian wheat imports to the tune of $500 million over the next 5 years. Egypt, as well as many Arab countries, heavily dependent on wheat imports, wheat being a major staple in that part of the world. And what are we to make of this this deal?
Indeed, for decades, wealthy Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, have basically thrown money into a black hole in countries like Egypt, where the economy didn't really improve under Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the Egyptian president. The economy has deteriorated significantly. Of course, you have the issues of the fallout of the Ukraine war with food prices and grain. Egypt is one of the largest, or the world's largest wheat importers. And so earlier this year, late last year, the Gulf states essentially decided that they were not going to do this anymore, that they were going to link aid to governments implementing International Monetary Fund style reforms that would really put their economies back on track. Well, the UAE, in a sense, has just abandoned this. It has offered, or it has signed an agreement with Egypt to fund for the next 5 years the import of wheat to the tune of $500 million. With other words, and it has not linked that to Egypt reforming its economy. So what that really means is that the Gulf states are in a bind. On the one hand, they want reforms, and reforms make sense and are good for everyone, recipient and the donor. But on the other hand, if a government is not willing to do that, then you run the political risk of economic collapse, for example, in Egypt.
James Dorsey, thank you for joining us, as always, on a Friday morning for us on Radio Islam International. Have a good weekend ahead of you, and looking forward to talking to you in future, James.
Thank you for having me, and have a good weekend.